origin of the 7-day week. Let's see here. Many, even among those who call themselves Adventists, question the true origin of the Sabbath and of the 7-day weekly cycle. Of course, the Bible claims that God instituted both during the creation week described in Genesis. However, critics of the biblical account claim that the 7-day week was actually invented by the Assyrians, or by Sargon, king of Akkad, around 2350 BC, passed on to the Babylonians, who then passed it on to the Jews during their captivity in Babylon around 600 BC. The ancient Romans used the 8-day week, but after the adoption of the Julian calendar in the time of Augustus, the 7-day week came into use in the Roman world. For a while, both the 7 and 8-day weeks coexisted in the Roman world, but by the time Constantine decided to Christianize the Roman world around AD 321, the 8-day weekly cycle had fallen out of use in favor of the more popular 7-day week. Secular historians and biblical critics often suggest that the 7-day week likely arose originally as a rough division of the lunar monthly cycle. However, the 7-day week is actually only 23.7% of a lunation, which means that a continuous cycle of 7-day weeks rapidly loses synchronization with the monthly lunar cycle. This problem is compounded by the fact that a lunation is only the mean time for the lunar phase cycle, with each individual lunar phase varying in length. Although the duodecimal, base 12, and sexagesimal, or base 60 numeral systems have historically been the primary systems used to divide other chronological and calendar units. Therefore, it is not immediately apparent why the 7-day week was selected by ancient cultures, rather than a week that included a number of days that was a factor of these numeral systems, such as a 6-day or a 12-day week, or a week that divided the lunation more accurately using a factor of these number systems, such as a 5-day or 10-day week. Finally, there are no historical Jewish or Babylonian records that confirm these cultures explicitly define the 7-day week as a quarter of a lunation. By the way, this will be in the description, a link to this. It seems then like the 7-day weekly cycle is a most unusual or arbitrary division of time that is unrelated compared to other more obvious divisions of time, month and year, on cyclical natural phenomena. So, which version of the history of the 7-day week is most likely correct? That of secular historians and biblical critics? Or that of the Bible itself? Why has a 7-day week been observed for so long by so many cultures? Why is this particular weekly cycle so popular? Compared to other more natural or rational options like the 10-day week that was attempted in France during the Bloody French Revolution and quote-unquote Enlightenment. Well, for one thing, the idea that the Jews adopted the 7-day week from the Babylonians during their captivity some 600 years BC is at least partially based on the still popular but effectively falsified documentary hypothesis of biblical critics. Numerous claims of those who framed the documentary hypothesis and of biblical critics in general have been definitely falsified. For example, biblical critics once argued that writing itself had not been invented by the time of Moses. Of course, numerous 20th century discoveries have falsified this notion, such as the discovery of the ancient Ebla tablets, or Ebla tablets. The Ebla tablets, written some 2200 years BC, prove that writing, even alphabetic typewriting, was in existence well before Moses. At least some 600 years, according to this. If you take the early date for the Exodus, 1400 BC, this is at least, 800 years before that. Some of the statements about creation found on these tablets also seem to parallel the biblical creation narrative, suggesting that the Genesis creation story, or something very similar to it, was known well before the Deuteronomists or even Moses came on the scene. In fact, The farther one goes back in time with archaeological discoveries, the closer the creation story seems to get to the one found in the Bible. These tablets also speak of a flood story like that of the flood in the Bible. The Ebla tablets also mention the names Abraham and Isaac, suggesting that such names were known and common during this time. They also tell of 2 sinful cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, and mention all 5 of the cities of the valley in the same order mentioned in the Bible. This is in the face of higher critics who had claimed that Sodom and Gomorrah, and other Canaanite cities of the Bible never did exist. However, the Ebla tablets show that the Bible was correct and the critics were wrong yet again. And the list goes on and on and on. Of course, the Ebla tablets do not mention the 7-day creation week, or any other particular weekly cycle for that matter. So maybe the critics are right for once when it comes to at least the origin of the 7-day week. Consider that if the biblical version is in fact the true version of history, that God may have actually provided extra biblical evidence within life itself of the true origin of the week. Is it possible? Wouldn't it be most surprising from the naturalistic perspective to find 7-day rhythms in living things? Yet this is exactly what has been discovered. Many living things, to include human beings, experience 7-day or circaseptan. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Circaseptan, that septan is 7, so circa would be like a cycle, I would imagine. Cycles of 7. Circaseptan biological cycles. The relatively new science of chronobiology has uncovered some totally unexpected facts about living things. To include the most puzzling 7-day cycle experienced by many living things. Some are very puzzling, in other words. Secular scientists find it difficult to explain how such a 7-day cyclical pattern would arise or evolve in living things by any natural means. Here's a quote from a New York, The Secrets of Our Body Clock, and this will be in the description. So here's a quote from a biology paper. At first glance, it might seem that the weekly rhythms developed in response to the 7-day week imposed by human culture thousands of years ago. However, this theory doesn't hold once you realize that plants, insects, and animals other than humans also have weekly cycles. Biology, therefore, not culture, is probably at the source of our 7-day week. Interesting. Susan Perry and Jim Dawson. Okay. Campbell summarizes the findings of the world's foremost authority on rhythms and the pioneer of the science of chronobiology. And I quote here, Jeremy Campbell. Franz Hallberg proposes that body rhythms of about 7 days, I guess this is a secondary source of an article. Franz Hallberg proposes that body rhythms of about 7 days, far from being passively driven by the social cycle of the calendar week, are innate, autonomous, and perhaps the reason why the calendar week arose in the first place. These circaseptan or about weekly rhythms are one of the major surprises turned up in modern chronobiology. 15 years ago, few scientists would have expected that 7-day biological cycles would prove to be so widespread and so long established in the living world. They are of very ancient origin, appearing in primitive one-celled organisms, and are thought to be present even in bacteria, the simplest form of life now existing. Specific examples of this cycle, these rhythms in humans include the rejection of organ transplants, immune response to infections, blood and urine chemicals, blood pressure, heartbeat, common cold, coping hormones, and even one's mood or general state of mind. There's also evidence of this cycle in the formation of tooth enamel. Links are in they have links in the article. There are also examples of other living things, such as the algae Acetabularia mediterranea. It's called mermaid's wineglass. Acetabularia mediterranea, or mermaid's wineglass. That shows a 7-day growth cycle. And there's Brazilian bees, that observe a 7-day Sabbath rest cycle. If the and that'll be in the article in the description of the video if you want to look at that stuff. If the 7-day week is an invention of culture and religion, as most historians would have us believe, how do we explain innate circaseptan, I know I'm saying that wrong, rhythms in primitive algae, rats, plants, bees, and flies? These forms of life have no calendar and can't read the Torah. There's even evidence that being in or out of sync with this cycle may have an effect on longevity. Consider, for example, that the lifespans of the facefly, Musca autumnalis, or the springtail, Phelsomia candida, are markedly longer when oviposition shifts are allowed to be carried out at intervals that are 7 days apart. There is, however, research suggesting a lunar influence on various of these cycles, but several other experiments have shown an intrinsic or endogenous quality to the circaseptan cycles that is apparently independent of any external influences. To include that of the lunar cycles, it does seem, however, that these endogenously derived rhythms are able to respond to external influences, such as circadian influences of day and night or the lunar-induced tides. What is especially interesting is that the circaseptan rhythm, among all other circadian rhythms, appear to be the one rhythm by which all others are tuned or orchestrated. In Franz Hallberg's view, a central feature of biological time structure is the harmonic relationship that exists among the various component frequencies of this time cycles. A striking aspect of this relationship is that the components themselves appear to be harmonics or subharmonics, multiples or submultiples of 7. Circaseptan and circasemeseptan rhythms are not arbitrary, even though they seem to lack counterpart rhythms in the external environment. And this from 2007. Some of these were from the late 80s and 90s. This one's from 2007. I haven't looked at any further research before reading this, so I'm probably going to check that out after, just see what people are saying about it now. But here's one from 2007. The endogenous nature of the about weekly rhythms is shown by their occurrence in animals kept under laboratory conditions, precluding circaseptan periodic input. Their appearance as circaseptan reaction, I hope I'm saying that not totally ridiculously, pattern after noxious stimuli, or introduction of an antigen, and in human subjects by the observation of their free-running rhythms that are not synchronized to environmental time cues, with a frequency different from the calendar week. It appears that our 7-day week, which is found in many ancient and modern civilizations, including the 3 main monotheistic religions, may be an adaptation to an endogenous biological rhythm rather than the rhythm being a societally impressed phenomenon. So in other words, there's evidence, scientifically speaking, that he's saying it's more likely that somehow this biological cycle, this innate biological cycle, existed in biology well before any religious calendar would have been made. So in other words, it's intrinsic, and that's probably the source of it, whatever your view is on how that would work. But it just so happens to fit with what you would expect if God created everything that way. The way in which it's in the different animal kingdoms, from insects to plants to larger animals, like from an evolutionary point of view, it would seem that must have been in there already, because it's not like being imposed on them from the outside somehow, especially in the wild. It wouldn't make any sense, because the week isn't based on any actual cyclical pattern per se, based on astronomy. So it doesn't make sense. So the scientists who are not Christians, they're just secular science, they're saying it's by what they're seeing, it's more likely that if you're going to just talk about where it develops out of it, that it would somehow come through biology, not external not religious or the religious observance that was like, they would say was developed isn't imposing it on the outside causing this. It's rather from biology up. Again, given the historical reliability of higher biblical critics compared to the fact that the Bible's claims about history have proven true time and time again, combined with the internal evidence for this rhythm cycle within ourselves and many, if not all, living things, is it really such a stretch to imagine that the Bible might be right yet again regarding the creation week and the Sabbath rest given to us by God from the very beginning of life on the planet? Consider a situation where someone, the God of the Bible in this case, claims to have created a given cyclical pattern of time specifically for our benefit. Example, like the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath in Mark 2:27. This is a testable claim. Given the truth of such a claim, the implication is very direct and clear. Obviously, in such a situation, one should actually expect to find some sort of biorhythms that is tuned to the particular weekly pattern. One should also expect that if one did not follow God's advice in following this pattern, given that God actually exists and is in fact our maker, that one would be able to notice a physical difference in one's general well-being when in or out of line with God's claimed ideal pattern for the weekly cycle. In other words, God has presented a testable hypothesis or claim to us that we can actually test in a scientific, potentially falsifiable manner. Perhaps there's a reason why Seventh-day Adventists are the longest-lived, ethnically diverse group of people in the world. It's like being told to use a particular fuel for your car for optimal performance by the car's designer. You can expect some sort of actual physical difference if you don't use the particular type of fuel you were told to use by the car's creator. So the article's in the description, and there you can go down the rabbit hole with some of the things I claimed in there if you wish. So I do find this fascinating because, again, these scientific these look like secondary sources, but from other sources. Although this one's from Erhard Haas, Chronobiology and the Endocrine System Advanced Drug Delivery Reviews. I think I kind of messed it up. Let me read it again. This is the more recent one that's in this article here. It's an older article, I'm sure. Yeah, if it's from 2012. So, let's see. What does it say? The endogenous nature of the weekly rhythms is shown by their occurrence in animals kept under laboratory conditions, which precluding the circaseptan periodic input. Their appearance as circaseptan reaction pattern after noxious stimuli or introduction of an antigen, and in human subjects by the observation of their free running with a frequency different from the calendar week. It appears that our 7-day week, which is found in many ancient and modern civilizations, including the three main monotheistic religions, may be an adaptation to an endogenous biological rhythm rather than the rhythm being a societally impressed phenomenon. But that's very interesting that they would. So they're not saying it makes the Bible true. He's just saying like the week somehow it comes out of this cycle that's there in biology. In other words, somehow that like comes to the surface, and they make that would they recognize that cycle in ancient times? That's hard to explain. But it's clearly something there. There's something tying reality to that sort of cycle, and it's just kind of curious that the Jews have this calendar. It's based on the moon, and the 7-day week just doesn't line up with it perfectly. So you can't explain it as a division of the months, or even years. And people have always wondered, well, some of the calendars say it wouldn't work with a 360-day year either. And then even then isn't accurate to the year. Like, was it perfectly 360 days in a year, like 0.000? But how would 7 go into 360? What? Let's see. 51.4 something times into 360. So the 360-day calendar used in the Bible that's interesting because a 360-day year is clearly a Babylonian sort of sexagemical or whatever. It's base 12 and 6 on a circle. We know that's in Babylon. So, but 7 doesn't go into that. But the Bible claims the 7 goes into God set the 7 up from the beginning. And it is no increment of any lunar or I should say any astronomical cycles. It's almost like God did that on purpose so that you can't explain it away. People are so apathetic, they don't even stop and think about how interesting that is. But anyways, the article's in there. So thanks for coming. Let's see who's here. Anybody here still? Hey, I'm not going Terry mode, and that doesn't look. Terry's arguments are better than you guys act like. It may not be proof, and what is proof, anyways? By the way, but look, dude, just deal with it. It's there. You can explain it away. You're free to explain it away. You can explain away anything if you want to. Look up the papers in the description. See what might disprove it. See what you find. These scientists have they don't seem to have any reason to think. It just so happens. It's just like one more coincidence. It's like, yeah, okay, fine. They developed this seemingly this environmental pressure, which has no basis in anything to do with how we keep time, and it just so happens that humans have this 7-day week goes as far back into history as we can see. Well, God claimed to make the 7-day week and has no good explanation if one's honest with the evidence. Oh, and what do you know? Seems like it's coming up from the biology rather than the other way around, even though it's not being impressed on them from outside. I mean, dude, if that's not good evidence for the origin, I mean, I don't know how you can be honest with the evidence. Oh, what do you know? Just happens to fit that story, a crazy story that I don't believe. Anyway, it's okay. I know you're an ideologue, so I'm just kidding. I don't know. Come up with a better answer. At some point, we have to say it's reasonable to believe it. Being born into a family that's Christian or not doesn't say anything about the truth of the claim. You were just born to be an atheist, I guess. I'll just say that. You were born that way. Everything's determined. We can't really reason, we just think we are. Although I do think that's partly true, by the way. I'm arguing with myself here. I think Jonathan Haidt is right about we often just think we're believing things for rational reasons. Like when Matt Dillahunty says, I have to believe this. I'm forced to. It's like he's relinquishing his ability to reason and think. It's like, I've just come to this conclusion without God would have to make me believe. I don't even know what that means. It's like a surrender of your, I don't know. No what? What's up, Nitty? Hey, Genesis. Yeah, exactly. The 7-day weekly cycle is independent of the lunar week because it's not even an increment. And that's what's so interesting about it. Obviously, you can, origin of the lunar cycle is, I couldn't argue that. They couldn't notice that from just observation. But why a 7-day week? 5 or 10 would make more sense. The circle, I mean, if they had, I accept the idea that a 360-day, although I do think it's what's in the Bible, we really don't know why or where the 360-day year idea comes from. And it's in the Bible. God uses it. I would argue that it's not a literal calendar, though, because the Jews never actually, there's no evidence that they actually were using that, even as far back as we can go, like in Babylon. They used it in the prophecies of Daniel, but Daniel would have known those weren't literal interpretations because for various reasons that I won't get bogged down with. But the point is, like, you can explain that by like a circle having 360 degrees. They clearly use the circle, the square, and the compass because it's very useful. And they could do math with this 60 base system. So that's I wouldn't argue for that. But the 7-day week, it's like what you would do to leave people, confounded. It's just interesting. And, there could be some explanation you could find for it, but isn't it funny that it doesn't fit all the other theories and what seems to be obvious about things people would just recognize naturally by paying attention. What a year is, the seasons would be really important. The monthly cycle would be important to the seasons. Obviously, a day is obvious, and then increments of the day being cut up based on that 6-base system or whatever. That's all obvious and can be deduced from the others, but not the 7-day week. And that's the first thing God establishes is in the Bible. And there's really no evidence that there's some other system that developed from. And it's found in the biological systems. I mean, not every animal. They've obviously, evolved somewhat, but it's still present in many of the different kingdoms of animals, including insects and plants. So then what are you going to say? They evolved. It had to have, but then if you're an evolutionist, you're going to have to say that somehow there's a 7-day thing going back to bacteria, and then it stayed in some of the systems as it evolved like that. But there's no external pressure for that we understand anyway. And that just happened. I mean, that's what you'd expect if God created more recently and then instituted the 7-day week, right from the start. That's the pattern. It's just weird. If that doesn't make you think there's some validity to the scriptures, I don't know what would. That's the kind of evidence you would expect if the story was true. So anyways, leave your comments. I'd love to hear your objections. I don't know if I was saying that right. It's circaseptan, circa, and then the septan, I think, is 7. So is that Latin? I don't even know. Anyway, just the cycles of 7, I guess, is what it means, I presume. But look it up. Look up circadian rhythms and cycles in biology papers. I've looked it up before. I'm trying to imagine what Nitty would say. If I recommend what's it called? One of those apps where you brain exercises or whatever. I forget which one I had, and it's been so long since I used it, but it was really fun. You little games, exercise your mind. There's a really fun one on there where they broke down the etymology of the word, and it would tell you the definition of the word, and then it'd have a bunch of options in columns, and you'd have to pick each part of the etymology for the definition given at the top, and it was like a timed thing. So you could see how many you would get and your scores, and they rank you. And it's fun. It's keeps your mind sharp. And they have math, English, spelling. I forget the other ones. Memory. It's pretty fun. If you're a competitive smarty pants. All right, guys. See you later. Thanks for stopping by. Yeah, there's secondary sources for sure. I think he's well, at least I'm going to look into it too, and then let me know what you find. They're just they look like quotes because it's just a Sabbath school lesson sort of thing, and it seems that the first few are somebody was a secondary source quoting some other information, but then it looked like the 2007 one may still be a secondary source, or maybe a quote from a secondary source from a primary source, perhaps, but I could be wrong. I'll have to look. Let me know what you find if you find anything interesting about it. I don't want to be misleading on anything. My comments are my own. Okay. Word. All right. Peace out, guys. See you later.